Hi, everybody, and welcome to the end of our fourth week of the 28-day challenge, during which we have been reading Me and White Supremacy by Layla Saad. I am the Reverend Alison Patton, and I'm pastor at Saugatuck Congregational Church, United Church of Christ here in Westport, Connecticut.
And I'm Jenny Nelson. I am the Director of Education and Community Engagement at Westport Country Playhouse.
And I'm Harold Bailey. I'm chair of Team Westport. I want to congratulate everyone for the last 28 days that you've been through. And if you're seeing this on Sunday, the 28th, this is the last day. It's what you've been through is an intensely personal and in many cases intensely wrenching kind of a process that should have delivered, I hope, a great deal of benefit to you as a human being, and a great deal of benefit to the way that you interact with others around you, not just people of color, but as we just went through in this last week, people who are not of color, and the way they treat other people, and the way that you might be able to influence that. This whole process is about unpacking what James Baldwin used to call the big lie. It's the big lie of racism, the big lie that there is this difference of people based on the way they look and the color, the melanin in their skin or not in their skin and their color. And what Layla Saad has done is to say that kind of poison is really the equivalent of putting on blinders with respect to differences, and saying there really are these differences, and those differences that are perceived are blinders. And she's broken them down into about 28 different blinders. You can probably break them down into hundreds. But basically what it shows is that as you lift up one of those blinders and take a look at it, you start to see, oh my goodness, this is the way I've looked at things, and actually the way the culture has looked at things for the last 400 plus years in the United States, with that blinder. And then there's another blinder lifted, and then there's another blinder lifted. And you start to see, not only is it just looking at things in that narrow lane, but that those lanes intersect all over the place. And we end up with kind of a crazy quilt that's built up. And it's my whole crazy quilt, and my grandparents' crazy quilt, and my cousin's crazy quilt, and my friend's, and you put all that stuff together, and you've got this massive mess of poison that's out there that we're trying to unravel. And that is not something you do, frankly, in a day. It's not something you do certainly in 28 days. In a lot of ways, it takes a lifetime to get all this stuff unraveled when you're talking about hiring and finance and affordable housing. And do I want my children to grow up with these people? And do I want these people next door to me, and so on? So you are headed, what you've done really is to take a major step in a process that will allow you to start to lift up those blinders and start to unravel this. And so it's the kind of thing where I hope you've come out of it not feeling like, why bother? It's too daunting for me to do. It most certainly is not. And this to us has, we've got a number of things that stood out to us this week that hit us in ways to continue that work and continue to feel committed to doing it. And I thought we could share some of that with you. We all hope to do that right now.
You want to go first, Jenny?
Oh, sure. I know we were having a really great conversation about some really particular passages in these last days that really, it is such a personal, this whole experience is very personal, right? Very introspective, but this last week is really when you start to think of ways to implement it in your life, in the day-to-day, and continuing to do the work after the book, right? So she's really trying to give us some tools and examples. One of the passages when talking about your family, on page 188, I'll just read here because no one says it better than her. However, right? When speaking about doing the work and putting it down, your unique and complex family dynamics, so the things that we all go through with our families, do not exempt you from doing this work in your family circles. BIPOC have complicated family dynamics too. And on top of that, they still have to deal with racism and white supremacy, right? And that really resonated for me. You too, Allison?
And she
yeah.
lifted that up before. I think when she talked about the 7th day, right, on week 1, that BIPOC don't get a break from racism, so we don't get a break from doing the reflection that we're called to. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's that idea of our comfort needs to be put aside in this work a lot of time, and the leaning in that we've talked about, right? Lean in to those feelings of discomfort, and in doing this work, we don't get to put it down. So that was one of the passages. Also on 192, she talks a little bit about how us trying to focus on being good white people is actually getting in the way of us doing the work, right? So, and that really resonated for me, because I have to say, in life, I'd love to hear from both of you. I hear this phrase a lot. Well, I'm a good person, and I'm sure that we are all trying to be our best selves, right, in our life. But just by stating that and living in that, it paralyzes us from really being introspective and finding ways that we can be better in this work, right? By giving ourselves that label, it almost gives us a free pass, because I'm a good person, right? I'm a well-meaning white person.
It's so much of this work is about practicing getting it wrong, right? And doing that well, which is hard for me, right? It's a hard space to occupy because we want to get it right. We'd like to get it right most of the time. So we've talked before about what it means to be called out on our mistakes, and to practice responding by saying, thank you, and I didn't know, and tell me more. That our mistakes can actually be evidence that we're doing the work is something I have to keep reminding myself.
Oh, I really like that. A mistake that's great. Yes. And I've been using that phrase, that thank you, I didn't know, tell me more, I'm sorry. And owning that moment and the humbleness of it, right? That we can be humbled by this work, and still continue on. On 195, she talks a little bit about privilege. So this is in You and Losing Privilege on day 27. She says, I'm not talking about using your privilege for good in some sort of white saviorist super ally kind of way. This is not about rescuing or saving BIPOC from becoming a voice for the voiceless. Rather, I am talking about the privileges, advantages, and comforts you must be willing to let go of so that BIPOC can have dignity in their lives.
So when I read that, it makes me want to get practical, right? And ask what concretely might we be called to give up, or to let go of, or to relinquish? I mean, what would we put on that list as examples of what it looks like to relinquish our white privilege?
It's such a great question. I think one of the first things that comes to my mind is to really, giving BIPOC opportunity for leadership positions, right? And then Harold, we were talking a little bit about something, and in being in the room, that white people are also receiving of that.
Yes,
right.
I mean, it's this kind of for instance, having a Black person lead the group, or having a person of color, period, lead the group. And therefore having that person actually do the framing of whatever it is that's being led, and that with that framing, decide which questions are going to be important and which aren't, which opinions are going to be important and which aren't, because they're kind of leading the flow of this thing without all of the assumptions about whose opinions are important based on their color. And being able to sit back and let that happen, that adds a great deal, not only to the person who is leading it, if they're the only person of color in the group, but it adds a great deal to all the other people who have to, because of that discipline, back off and question what are their unconscious negative assumptions about that kind of leadership. So there's a plus to everybody. It's not just to the person who's of color. And that goes for all of this, all of these interactions.
Well, that is, I think for many of us, one of the core claims, right, that our whole community is enriched by the contributions of people of color in a way that we haven't benefited because of systematic racism. I really appreciate that reminder.
Any
I think we also give up our comfort, right? Jenny, what were you going to say about?
Oh, that I was just going to ask. Yeah.
Yeah, we've talked about that again and again, but it is in any given moment, white privilege can look like choosing to be uncomfortable rather than holding on to comfort, right? Choosing to speak up rather than choosing silence, choosing to raise the question rather than let it go.
Mm-hmm.
That
Yeah. And I think it's interesting to observe, why do we need to feel comfortable? What is it? There is some science that leads the fight or flight,
Mhm.
right? That in our brains, we will always kind of go towards either fight or flight, right? Because out of comfort and safety, kind of, it's a little bit in our DNA. But always observing in ourselves, why do I need to feel comfortable right now? How is that serving me? Right? How is that serving me and the thing that is important to me, which is helping to dismantle systemic racism, right? Is this actually putting an obstacle, my assumption about comfort or what I think I need, to kind of step outside of yourself and say, what would be the worst thing that would happen if I was just uncomfortable for a moment, right?
Right. So the invitation is to, instead of centering my comfort, is to center the dignity of BIPOC. And that's a word that I circled a couple of times this week. Jenny, I think you had a quote that you pulled out, and so did I, both that used the word dignity. Was there one more that you wanted to share?
I don't know if I have one in reference to dignity, but you're so right, Alison. That really comes up a lot in this. One of the things that she does talk a little bit about is kind of repledging every day. I know that's another thing, repledging to this, right? To be active in giving up your privilege, stepping aside, right? For the dignity of BIPOC, right? And really every day making a conscious repledge to this work. A lot like in this book, right? We talked about that a lot. Every day was kind of a recommitment to that. So,
right. And if you miss a day, then you do it the next day, right? You don't, as a kid, I have, I look back, I have a dozen unfinished journals because every time I started a journal and then skipped a couple days, I thought, oh, I failed. I can't finish this journal, right? And it took me years to learn that it was okay. I could just pick back up wherever I left off. I think that's important in this work.
Yeah, and that kind of leads into that perfectionism we're always talking about.
Yeah. So page 200, anti-racism is not about perfectionism. And then the very last sentence on page 200, right after that, it's about the intention to help create change, met with the consistent commitment to keep learning, keep showing up, and keep doing what is necessary so that BIPOC can live with dignity and equality. There's that dignity again. Mm-hmm. To me, that was a really helpful summary statement of what this work is about.
Mm-hmm. Just keep going. Don't yourself be your greatest obstacle, right? Don't let this consistent need to be perfect, which really feeds into the white supremacy. It's definitely a characteristic of it, that if I'm not perfect, whatever we deem to be perfect, I'm just going to put it down and I'm not going to do the work, right? It's very all or nothing thinking, that this is so difficult. This is so emotionally taxing that, right, I'm putting these kind of obstacles in my own way. But you can just keep going. You can do little things each day. You can do a bigger thing. You skip a day, like Alison said, you fall out, you get back on, right? This work is never ending. And if we're looking for a conclusion, a resolution, it's not going to come in the way that we want, right? That we're looking for. It just continues on. And hopefully we will continue to go to a higher consciousness and evolution, but it's not going to give us that sense of resolve. Over. Yeah, it's over. Right, it's over.
Doesn't Layla Saad say it at one point that one of the goals is to do the work even when you don't get the praise, right? That the goal cannot be that I do this work and eventually am told that I've figured it out and congratulations. That's not necessarily going to happen, and we do it anyway.
Right, and that we have empathy for how hard that is.
Right.
Right, that we're all in that is a hard place to live. It's not an easy journey to know that there's not going to be a gold star. There's not going to be that sense of completion, right? This work is hard. But just like we said at the beginning, that doesn't mean we get to put it down.
So where the rubber hits the road, right? Our relationships with our family and our friends and the ways that we exercise leadership, that was the topic for this past week. We had a couple of questions about how to do that.
Yeah, and this is really the practical application, as if we've taken this amazing, 28-day class with Layla Saad, and now she's giving us these tools for practical application, but that it's also still not going to be this perfect journey, right? That even though we have these resources, like Harold was talking about at the beginning, and we've done some of this introspection, this is the next step of introspection, right? How do I actually put this into practice and know that sometimes it's going to be really bumpy. Sometimes it's going to feel purposeful and like I've really done something to move the needle. But it's kind of going to be all in there. So we were talking a little bit about some things to think about on your journey of really specifically with friends. And could apply to family as well. But one of the things we were talking about was persistence, right? So this really feeds into what we've been talking about, is just keep going, just keep moving, just keep doing this work. And in that, you're modeling. So one of the best things we can do, right, is to model this journey and to make sure that we are as vocal about it with others, right? So in a room, we're that voice in the room, right? That is ringing the bell, as it were, that is talking about these things. And in everything we do in our life, it's really centering around this value system of trying to dismantle systemic racism. And that all the people that you know that about you. And we had talked about a little bit about kind of performative allyship, kind of giving that grace, because sometimes that is the first step, right? Putting up our signs, which you can see mine right here in the back, wearing our shirts, doing those things can be that first step. And that's a way to signal to others, I'm on the road, I'm on this journey, I want you to come with me. And so the persistence of modeling that is going to hopefully resonate with others, and they're going to see what you're doing, or they're actually going to feel like they can come to you and ask you a question. They can come to you and say, I've decided to go on this journey too. Can we be accountable to each other? Can you hold, that starts to happen when people know you're involved in this work and you're modeling that. So that can be great. We want to talk about setting boundaries, maybe?
So, this is one of the way the question came to us. It was described something many of us may have experienced, which is I have some friends in my life and we've been at this again and again, and we just don't agree. So now what do I do? Uh, i- there may be those in your life who pivot very quickly, but there will be others who won't. So the question becomes, how does that affect our relationship with each other, right? And one of the things to contemplate for yourself is what boundaries feel important for you to set. So assuming this is a relationship that's important and it's not one that you want to abandon, there may be relationships in our lives where we say this relationship is no longer tenable, right? But those aren't the relationships we're talking about here. We're talking about the ones where there's some deep and abiding connection. But on this point, this doing the work of dismantling racism, we are in different places. So you might ask yourself, where do I draw the lines? Where do I hold space open for conversation? And when do I not tolerate a perspective that is harmful to BIPOC? Right? Again, how do I center the dignity of BIPOC in our conversations? And how do I convey what matters to me and to my family? Right. So, you may draw some boundaries around when you have conversation, how you have conversation, how long that conversation lasts, what language is permitted and not permitted. Um, and you may think about the degree to which you want to be invitational, so that we can keep learning, and when it's no longer constructive. Um, say this is uh, you may be at that spot, but that perspective is not welcomed in this household at this time. I'm happy to have a conversation with you at the coffee house down the street for 30 minutes if you want to wrestle with me. That's what I have to offer, right? And I appreciate, Jenny, you lifting up that so much of this is about modeling what matters to me, right? So we talked a little bit about leaning on the relationship. If you value me, if you love me, if you respect me, then I invite you to listen in on something that I own as a commitment. Let me tell you about that.
Yeah, I think that can be so beneficial because that foundation of love is there, right? That through this friendship, this relationship, and so by calling on that, that's a commonality that you have with that friend, right? And it's coming from that space. Another technique is to call someone in and call someone out. We've talked about that before. So that's making that choice in that moment. If you're, let's say, with a group of friends and a friend says something that doesn't sit with you, that isn't okay, do you call them out in that moment, right? In front of the rest of your friends? Or is it something that later on you give them a call, you send them an email, you pull them aside privately? This is messy, right? These are negotiations you kind of have to make in the moment. And so much of this just takes practice, right? Practicing these things. The more we practice them, the more we will start to be able to listen to that intuition to tell us what we think we need to do in this moment. And that really, yeah, go ahead, Alison. Yeah.
I wondered, it looked like Harold had something to add in here.
Look, the main thing here is we're talking about persistence and modeling and so on. What this is about is making your awareness a part of everything you do.
Nice.
We've said race is involved with every single thing you do every day, whether you see a person of color or not for a year, because you've made a decision to have an attitude about those people that you are not seeing, whether they're there or not. So the focus should really be here. We talk about the work, but really this was just to get you started in incorporating some understanding about those people you're not seeing, if you're not seeing them, are those people you are seeing where you say and do and have attitudes about things that you don't even realize on a regular basis. And to make that as natural for you as a part of your breathing on a regular basis. It's not, when we say work, it almost makes it sound like, whoop, got to remember to go do this. I got to remember to do that. When I talk to somebody, I got to make sure that they know that now I have a different perspective than I had before. Yeah, make it natural. When it comes up, it's there. But the whole point is, you know, that your perspective has shifted and your understanding about these 28 different perspectives have shifted. And where it's natural, it comes in. And where it wasn't natural for you, now it is. And it becomes more and more part of who you are over time. So the focus ought to be really on you and your understanding and your ability to incorporate that into who you are, as opposed to worrying about changing somebody else and their attitudes. You'll change it by changing yourself. You'll change it by changing your interactions with other people. And that's more important than anything else in the world. And that's the real gem out of this to me for everybody that's involved. I did want to say one other word about, and this may seem like it's a tangent, but it isn't. It's white parents of children of color, which gets to be a particularly sticky area. What do you say now that your perspective may have shifted? And do you run right out and say, well, oh, wow, you know, here's what I picked up, and are you seeing this and that? I want to say that there is nothing more complicated than being a white parent of a child of color. Why is that complicated? Why? Because when you walk in a room and people start talking, you're going to hear all the negative perspectives, all the big lies about your child that you wouldn't hear if you were a black parent, because nobody's going to say that around a black parent in general. And you're going to hear all that stuff. And then you've got to worry about how is that being applied to your child. And if anybody were to talk to you, they'd say, oh, of course, I never. I mean, but you know, your child's different. So you have to have a particular sensitivity about going to parents of children of color who are getting it both ways, because they can hear the reality over there. And then they've got to deal with raising the child inside that reality, and yet trying to change it so that their child doesn't have to do it. And then worrying that they can't understand all the stuff, and they can't understand all the stuff the kids are getting, because kids are never going to tell them all the things they're going through. There is so much complexity there. I would say we've got to be very sensitive about trying to push your new view, your new perspective on those particular folks. The most important thing to be there is, again, an ear, and to say, I'm here, I'm really seeing some different things. You know, if you want to talk about it, I'm here, and maybe I can help. But I understand if you don't want to. And really being very, very, very gentle about that on faith. So that's, I just throw that as an aside.
I really appreciate that, Harold, and it speaks in a particular way to a general question that you all may have at this point, having been through this work, as you look around in your own life and see white friends or family members who are in relationship with people of color, and think that white friend or family member would really benefit from this book. Right. So the question is, what do I do in that moment? And as we talked about that together, we said, sure, you can share the book, but remember that Layla Saad's focus is on our inner monologue and the learning that we're doing. So when we share this book, it might be in the context of saying, this is a journey that I've been on, and I've been really impacted by it. It's been meaningful, and I'm continuing to try to learn how to address my own white supremacy and partner and support those around me. Maybe you are interested in this too. Let me tell you more about my own journey if and when you want to talk about it, Right. So the focus is not on identifying the people around you that you know need to change, but back to what Jenny and Harold have both said this afternoon on focusing on how I model the learning that I'm doing.
Yeah, that's so important. And I just love that in this we're honoring our work and the power of one, right?
Mm.
That one person making real change in their life and then giving that, modeling that in the world, that can make all the difference.
Huge difference.
It really, really can. And so sometimes we feel very small. How can I possibly incite any change in anything in my environment? But by simply walking this walk and integrating it, I love that we're talking about that, Harold, integrating it into your life, right? That it really becomes a natural thing, that really honors this work and that you can do it. You can do it. And it can be joyful. It can be energizing. It can be purposeful. It can be hard, but it can also live in a place of joy because we're moving towards this better world for everyone, right? And so that can also, I feel like sometimes we forget about that part, right? But this work, I know, brings the three of us a lot of joy to have these conversations about moving forward. So
it's seeing human beings as human beings, and that's the real idea. So the work is no longer work. That's the idea.
that was so good. The work is no longer work. I love that.
When you can find joy in screwing up because it means you get a chance to say, wait, tell me more.
Right.
That's a good day.
Exactly.
But yes,
Great.
that is so true.
Well, are we ready to talk about next steps?
Yeah, let's
do it.
All right. We thought, since you've just been through 28 straight days of this, that we'd have a little bit of a break, but we certainly want to continue to have you process what you've just been through and have an opportunity to talk to others about that. So around March 24th, and I think it may be March 24th exactly, our idea is to start 4 straight sessions. That'll be 2 weeks apart. So every 2 weeks starting around March 24th, we're going to have a session that will take 1 week at a time, where you can come in a big group and we will have you break down into small discussion groups of 5 or 6 people and be able to discuss that week of insights, what it meant for you, and maybe processing some things that might still be concerning to you. What we do at the beginning of the first session is to spend some time framing, here's how we're going to operate inside those groups. Here are the guidelines, here are the principles, here's how we're going to make that work. And then we'd have you go through talking about that week, the week 1, week 2, week 3, week 4, for 4 straight weeks. The whole idea, by the way, is that at the end of that, you will have found some people that you may want to continue a discussion group with over the long term. And that we can then incorporate maybe into that group that you want to have people of color, because these discussions are going to be continuing the discussions of people who were white or have the ability as people of color to pass for white, who would be in those sessions. So that's what's coming next, and you should be hearing about that shortly.
Yeah, so we'll be sending out some information to that effect. So if you're watching these, you've registered for the challenge, so you'll be receiving information about next steps to be involved in the small groups. And just tagging back to what Harold's saying, having someone to hold yourself accountable to is a great next step in this interim while we're resting, reflecting, not putting it down, but we're just giving ourselves a little time to digest. Having that other white person to really hold yourself accountable to in these dialogues for this long journey ahead is really important in that, in doing the work so that it isn't work anymore, which I just love. And so that we can really keep continuing a dialogue about this work. And if you have more questions, because we want to continue to be here for you and help you on the road. Please feel free to continue emailing us at education@westportplayhouse.org. And we will do our very best to answer your questions, give you feedback, or get you in touch with someone that can give you resources and tools and the answers that you seek, because we still want to continue in conversation with you and the community.
Absolutely.
One other thing is, if you have friends who have been through this and have actually just gone off and done this on their own, this is the 28 days plus the journaling, but didn't register, we will have shortly a way for them to get connected, a site, and we should have that up within the next week or so. So you can get everybody you know who's been through it registered and ready to go through the next set of discussions. Thanks. Yeah.
Excellent.
So
It sounds great. So you can hear my dogs barking in the background.
That's a signal.
That's real life. Yes, it is a signal. But keep going, keep doing the work, rest, reflect, and we will see you really soon to continue on the journey with you. But thank you so much for continuing to be with us. Thank you for the work that you're doing.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Harold and Jenny, thank you for partnering through this month. It's been totally fun to have these conversations with you.
Absolutely.
I agree. We'll just have to keep meeting, the three of us, just chatting, because these are giving me life. So it's great. All right, everyone, be well. Take care.